Let me start with the optimistic version of this story. Hopeful, because it exists, and it deserves to be heard first. The United States imports only about 20% of its fertilizer. It has domestic production, it has strategic reserves, it has alternative suppliers in Canada, Trinidad, Russia. The food supply chain is complex, yes, but it is also resilient. It has absorbed shocks before. It absorbed the Ukraine crisis of 2022, it absorbed COVID, it absorbed drought years and flood years and years of extraordinary disruption. And here is the most reassuring argument of all. Experts say the impact on grocery bills will depend on how long the conflict lasts. That's the optimistic version. Hold on to it. Because in the next 12 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the complete map of why for millions of people buying food this week, not next year. That optimism arrived too late. I've spent time watching how economic systems communicate with each other. Thoughtful, or more precisely, how they fail to. The energy sector sees oil prices. The agricultural sector sees fertilizer costs. The retail sector sees supply chain disruption. The consumer sees the price tag on the shelf. And the problem, the real problem, the one that I see playing out in my own environment, in the conversations I have, in the numbers that are already public, is that none of these sectors is talking clearly to the others. And almost none of them is talking clearly to you. Size. This is not malicious. It is systemic. Nobody coordinates the information between sectors, and in that coordination gap, the bill quietly accumulates. And then it arrives. All at once. That's what the complete map looks like. Let me show it to you. We are now 19 days into a conflict that began on February 28th, 2026. Size. And here is the first fact that the optimistic version of this story tends to skip over. The damage to your grocery bill is not a future risk. Part of it has already happened. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, grocery prices in the United States were already up 2.4% year over year in February, before a single missile was fired. U.S. ammonia prices as of March 10th were 41% higher than they were last March. U.S. urea prices have risen 21% in the same period. And according to the American Farm Bureau Federation, the countries most exposed to disruption from this conflict, Egypt, Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, together account for approximately 49% of global urea exports and roughly 30% of global ammonia exports. Concerned. Now remember the optimistic argument. The U.S. has alternative suppliers. It does. But fertilizer markets are globally integrated. When supply is removed from one part of the system, the price adjusts everywhere, including in Canada, Trinidad, and Russia, the very countries the optimists point to as alternatives. Faith Parham, an economist at the American Farm Bureau Federation, stated it directly. Fertilizer markets are globally integrated, so supply disruptions in one region can influence prices and availability elsewhere. Exhales sharply. The alternatives exist, but they are not immune to the shock they are being asked to absorb. Now, let me show you the map. Layer by layer. Curious. There is not one mechanism connecting this war to your grocery bill. There are four. They operate simultaneously. They move at different speeds. And they hit different parts of your shopping cart at different times. Size. This is the part that almost nobody is explaining. Layer 1. Fuel. This week. This is the fastest moving layer, and the one already in your life right now. According to Time magazine, since the United States launched military operations against Iran on February 28th, American families are paying nearly 80 cents more per gallon for gas every time they fill up. Size. That is more than $300 million in additional costs per day across the country. Brent crude moved from $67 to above $100 per barrel in just over 2 weeks. Now connect that to food. Transportation costs account for a significant portion of the retail price of fresh produce. According to analysis from the University of Guelph Economics Department, for some fresh produce, delivery costs can account for as much as 9 to 10% of the retail price, According to energy firm Enpro International, it now costs about 26% more to fuel a food delivery semi-truck than it did at TIDA end of February. The total cost of a fill-up for a long-haul freight truck has risen from $711 to $895. University of San Diego economics professor Alan Jin stated it plainly. If transportation costs go up 5%, that translates to a 0.5% increase at the grocery store. Exhales sharply. That cost is being passed on right now, not in 6 months, now. The trucks that moved food from farms to warehouses last week paid more for fuel than the week before. The warehouses that store food under refrigeration are paying more for energy than the week before. Tadamon, the price adjustments are not all visible yet, but the inputs that will produce them are already in the system. Layer 2. Jet fuel. Within weeks. Concerned. This one affects your food budget indirectly, but it matters for how you make decisions this spring and summer. According to Time, jet fuel has surged approximately 85% since the start of the war. Jet fuel accounts for roughly 30% of airlines' operating costs in normal conditions. You will feel this when you search for flights for spring break or summer travel. Size. And when discretionary spending gets compressed, when the family that would have taken a vacation instead stays home, the entire retail and food service economy absorbs that contraction. Consumer confidence is already responding. According to CNBC analysis, the war is affecting consumer confidence, in addition to the direct supply chain strain. Discretionary-heavy retailers are already being flagged by analysts as among the largest losers from the war. When people spend more on essentials, they spend less on everything else. And the businesses that depend on discretionary spending pass their own stress back into the economy through wages, employment, and further price pressure. Layer 3. Fertilizer. Weeks to months. Thoughtful. This is the layer that the optimists point to correctly. It moves more slowly than fuel. But here is what the optimistic version omits. It has already started moving. According to RSM chief economist Joe Brusuelas, writing in a client note published this week, ammonia prices in the Middle East were up 92% year over year as of March 10th. Urea prices were up 70% over the same period. He was explicit. Higher fertilizer costs will contribute to higher prices at U.S. supermarkets. More than 1/3 of globally traded fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial traffic through that route has been largely halted since February 28th. The disruption is happening during the precise window when farmers across the Northern Hemisphere are purchasing fertilizer for spraying planting. Concerned Veronica Nye, chief economist at the Fertilizer Institute, said something I want you to hear carefully. This is a global impact on fertilizer costs, and she expects much more passing on of these costs to consumers in this scenario. Something, she noted, that has not been seen before at this scale. And Wolf Research chief economist Stephanie Roth estimated that the disruption could raise food-at-home inflation by roughly 2 percentage points, adding approximately 0.15 percentage points to headline inflation, on top of the 2.4% that was already there before the war began. Layer 4. Processed foods and packaged goods. Months to a year. Thoughtful. This is the slowest layer, and the one the optimists are most correct about, in isolation. Packaged foods, canned goods, cereals, cooking oils, protein products. These supply chains have longer lead times, more buffers, more flexibility to delay price changes. But there is a structural reality that the optimists tend to underweight. According to CNBC analyst coverage from this week, retailers have become much better at building flexibility in their supply chains. That was accelerated during the tariff pressures of last year, it is concerned. But the bigger worry, as one analyst put it, is if this continues to last, and the key dynamic. During the inflation years of 2022 and 2023, retailers were able to raise prices, and that raising of prices offset some weakening in unit sales. The same playbook is available to them now. Retailers do not absorb cost shocks in defining. They pass them on. The question is not whether it will be passed on. The question is the timing. Now, let me place this in the context that most of the coverage is missing. Thoughtful people in my environment, people I speak to, people who are careful with their budgets, people over 45 who have seen this movie before, are not panicking, but they are noticing. They noticed in 2022 when food prices climbed sharply. They noticed in 2023 when prices stayed high even after energy costs normalized. They are noticing now that 3 years later, prices never fully came back down. And something new is being added on top. Royal Bank of Canada chief economist Francis Donald described it this week with precision. Everyone has to eat. When you see gasoline and food prices go up, people look at other areas to cut. They may trim discretionary spending. They may draw down savings. For a consumer on a fixed income or a consumer over 50 managing a household on a set budget, this is not an abstract macroeconomic discussion. Size. This is the math of how far this Nuiwa eeks paycheck gets. Professor Mohammed Elahi of Quinnipiac University, speaking 2 weeks ago, captured the information failure directly. The world is focused on gas prices because of the immediate impact, but there are several other fronts where the problem is brewing and people are not paying enough attention. That is the systemic failure I am describing. Not malice, not conspiracy. A failure of coordination between sectors that speak different languages: energy, agriculture, retail, macroeconomics, and a consumer who receives only the summary at the end of the chain. Frustrated, a higher number on the shelf. So let me give you the complete map. Every layer in order of speed. Serious. This week, fuel prices are already higher. Transportation costs for food delivery are already higher. The trucks that moved your food paid more. The warehouses that stored it paid more. Some of those costs are already in the prices you see today. The rest will arrive within days. Within weeks. Fertilizer prices have already spiked sharply in global markets. Farmers buying for spring planting are paying significantly more right now. Those who cannot afford full application rates are reducing them. Lower application rates mean lower yields later in the year. Concerned. Within months, the lower yields and higher input costs work their way through the agricultural supply chain into commodity prices: grain, corn, soybean, vegetable oils, which then move into processed food prices, restaurant prices, and packaged goods. Within the year, if the disruption is prolonged, and CSIS has been explicit that the ultimate impact depends on how long the conflict lasts, the second-order effects compound: tighter food supply, sustained elevated prices, and the erosion of purchasing power that hits hardest the people who spend the highest proportion of their income on food. Now I want to return to the optimistic version. Thoughtful. And I want to be fair to it. It is correct that the United States has alternative fertilizer suppliers. It is correct that supply chains have more flexibility than they did 5 years ago. It is correct that warmer weather could soften the impact of higher fuel costs on fresh produce transport in the coming months. It is correct that beef prices had been stabilizing before this conflict began. The optimists are not wrong about any of that. But here is what the optimistic version assumes: that the conflict ends quickly, and it assumes it without saying so. Every reassurance is the impact will depend on how long it lasts, there are buffers, there are alternatives, contains the same hidden condition: if this resolves in weeks, not months. Size. As of today, March 19th, 2026, there is no clear timeline for resolution. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. The fertilizer supply window for Northern Hemisphere spring planting is measured in weeks, not months. And the bill that has been quietly accumulating since February 28th will arrive at the checkout counter on a schedule that is not determined by how quickly the headlines move on. The complete map is not complicated. A war disrupts energy supply. Energy costs move into transportation. Transportation costs move into retail prices. Simultaneously, energy costs move into fertilizer production. Fertilizer costs move into agricultural input prices. Agricultural input prices move into commodity prices. Commodity prices move into processed food prices. Every step in this chain has a lag, but none of them is infinite. And the first steps have already happened. Size. The question the optimistic version asks is, how long will this last? The question the complete map asks is different. How much has already been set in motion? For a system where nobody coordinates the information between sectors, where the energy analyst does not call the agricultural economist, who does not call the retail analyst, who does not call the consumer. The honest answer is that by the time the full picture becomes visible to any one person, the bill has already been partially written. Curious. You're looking at the complete map now. What you do with it is your decision. I want to leave you with a question that I think is more useful than most of what you will read about this topic. Thoughtful. The mechanism connecting a war in the Middle East to the price of food in your kitchen is documented, known, and has been studied by every major agricultural economics institution for years. And yet, as one professor put it 2 weeks ago, people are not paying enough attention to the fronts where the problem is brewing. My question for the comments is this. Curious. When you look at your grocery receipt from this week and compare it to 1 year ago, what do you see? And do you think the people responsible for explaining these connections are doing their job? Share this with someone who is asking why their grocery bill keeps going up. The answer is on this map.